In December 1944, if Patton didn't move fast enough, the 101st Airborne wasn't going to be taken prisoner. They weren't going to be forced into surrender. They were going to be erased. The Screaming Eagles were sealed inside Bastogne. Snow, smoke, and steel closing in from every road. Their ammunition was almost gone. Bandages and morphine had run dry. Wounded men lay stacked in freezing basements because there was nowhere else to put them. German armor pressed tighter each hour, and Hitler had issued an uncompromising order. Bastogne was to be taken at all costs, and the sky itself turned against the Allies. The weather was so savage that aircraft couldn't fly. No fighters, no bombers, no supply drops. The defenders were alone, except for one man who refused to accept that this was how it would end. Because this was the moment Dwight D. Eisenhower realized something he didn't want to admit out loud. The only general who might be able to save Bastogne, and maybe the entire campaign, was the one general everyone struggled to control. And when George S. Patton actually pulled it off, Eisenhower said something that revealed just how close the Allies had come to catastrophe. This is a story of impossible odds, desperate men, and a phone call that changed everything. 4 days. That's all the 101st had left. Here's what happened next. December 19th, 1944. Inside the Supreme Headquarters War Room, the air felt heavy, like the building itself understood what was happening. Officers spoke in low, clipped voices, delivering report after report that sounded worse than the one before. German forces had slammed through the American lines in the Ardennes, ripping a jagged rupture across roughly 50 miles of front. Confusion spread like wildfire, units displaced, roads jammed, plans shattered. But the most dangerous news wasn't about the width of the breakthrough. It was about a small Belgian town most people hadn't even heard of a week earlier, Bastogne. Now it was the hinge of the entire crisis. More than 10,000 American troops, centered around the 101st Airborne Division, alongside pieces of other units, were trapped inside a tightening ring. No clean escape, no clear relief. German forces nearly tripled their numbers, and the one advantage the paratroopers normally depended on, air resupply and close air support, had been ripped away by the storm. Eisenhower stood over the map, studying the ugly swelling of the German Bulge. His face looked carved from fatigue. He had barely slept since the offensive began, and every briefing seemed to strip away another layer of hope. The intelligence updates read like a slow execution. Ammunition rationed, 10 rounds per rifle in some sectors. Artillery shells dwindling. Medical supplies nearly gone. The wounded freezing in cellars while medics tried to do miracles with empty hands. German pressure rising, attacks intensifying, the perimeter tightening. Eisenhower finally asked the question that mattered most, the one nobody wanted to answer. How long can they hold? The intelligence officer hesitated, because hesitation was the only way to soften a sentence like that. Sir, realistically, 4 to 5 days. Maybe a week if they're lucky. After that, they'll be out of ammunition and supplies. The Germans will overrun them. Eisenhower's jaw tightened hard enough to show it. Losing an airborne division wasn't just a battlefield loss. It was a blow to the spirit of the entire Allied force. These weren't ordinary troops. These were the men who had dropped into Normandy on D-Day, who had fought through Market Garden, men who carried a kind of myth around them. If Bastogne became their grave, morale across the front would crack. What are our options for relief? Eisenhower demanded. The answers came back cold. Montgomery's British forces were holding the northern shoulder of the breakthrough, but they couldn't pivot south fast enough. Other American units were in desperate defensive battles, barely holding their own ground. There was no immediate strength in position. No one, except one army 100 miles to the south, Third Army, which meant one name, Patton. It always circled back to Patton. Eisenhower had spent years balancing the man's brilliance against his ego, his controversies, his habit of marching past the limits of discipline as if they were suggestions. Commanding Patton was like riding a weapon you weren't fully sure you could aim. But now, staring at the map, with 10,000 Americans boxed in and running out of time, Eisenhower reached the conclusion he hated most. Patton might be the only one who could do the impossible fast enough. "Get me Patton," Eisenhower ordered. "Tell him we need him at Verdun tomorrow, emergency conference, and tell him to bring offensive plans. He'll understand what that means." When the room cleared, Eisenhower stayed behind, alone with the map, alone with the knowledge that if Bastogne fell, history would write that sentence with his name attached. His aide, Harry Butcher, later recorded Eisenhower speaking quietly, almost like a prayer, almost like a warning to a man miles away. "George, for once in this goddamn war, do exactly what I need you to do. Those paratroopers are counting on you. America is counting on you. I'm counting on you. Don't let me down." December 19th, 1944, Verdun. That meeting became legend, the moment Patton made the promise that turned despair into movement. But what people often miss is Eisenhower's side of that moment, the weight of what he asked and the price he was willing to demand if Patton failed. The atmosphere inside Verdun headquarters was tight, tense, almost electric. Eisenhower opened with a line meant to keep the room from collapsing into panic. "This situation is to be regarded as one of opportunity for us, and not disaster." It was leadership in the raw, calm phrasing over an ugly truth. Everyone in that room knew this was the worst crisis since D-Day. Then Eisenhower turned to the generals. "I want you to think carefully before you answer. How quickly can we mount a relief operation to reach Bastogne?" Men started calculating logistics, roads, fuel, distances, winter movement, German resistance. Then Patton spoke, blunt as a hammer. "I can attack on the 22nd with 3 divisions. Silence hit the room. Not the kind of silence that means agreement, the kind that means, did he just say that out loud? To break off active operations, pivot a massive force 90 degrees, push more than 100 miles through winter terrain, and launch a coordinated assault in 72 hours. It was beyond what most commanders would even propose, let alone promise. Eisenhower stared straight at Patton because he had seen Patton's showmanship before, and he wasn't about to gamble a division on bravado. "George," he said, measured and lethal in its seriousness, "I'm not asking for optimism. I'm not asking for what might be theoretically possible. I'm asking what you can genuinely accomplish. The lives of 10,000 American soldiers depend on your answer." Then he drove the point home like a bayonet. The 101st is surrounded, outnumbered, running out of everything. If you say you'll be there and you're not, they die. All of them. Eisenhower paused. "So I'll ask again. Can you attack on December 22? Patton didn't blink. "Ike, I already have 3 plans prepared. My staff anticipated this. We wargamed the contingencies. On the 22nd, my 4th Armored Division attacks north toward Bastogne. This isn't a promise. It's a fact." Eisenhower studied him, not searching for confidence, but for the usual performance, the swagger, the flair. Instead, he saw something colder. Preparation. Patton hadn't improvised this. He'd expected it. He'd laid rails before the train even arrived. And Eisenhower, who trusted very few men completely, recognized that as the difference between arrogance and capability. "All right, George," Eisenhower said, "you've got your mission. Relieve Bastogne. You have operational freedom to execute as you see fit." Then Eisenhower leaned forward, lowering his voice into a tone his staff rarely heard. "But understand this. If you fail, if those paratroopers are lost because this relief does not arrive in time, there will be consequences none of us can afford. Am I perfectly clear?" Patton's reply came instantly. "Crystal clear, sir. I won't fail." After the meeting, Eisenhower pulled aside his chief of staff, General Walter Bedell Smith. Smith later recorded the moment because it revealed the truth beneath Eisenhower's calm. Eisenhower asked almost privately, did he believe Patton could actually do it? Smith admitted it seemed impossible, and Eisenhower's answer was the kind of line that only comes from a man forced to bet everything on a single move. "That's why I'm sending Patton," Eisenhower replied, "because only he might attempt what others believe impossible." December 20th to 25, 1944. As Patton's Third Army pivoted north, Eisenhower endured the hardest week of his command, watching reports arrive like funeral notes, counting hours the way men count bullets. Every few hours, new messages came in from Bastogne. December 21st, German artillery hammered American positions without pause. Casualties climbed, the ring tightened. Then came the report that Bastogne's commander, General Anthony McAuliffe, had answered a German surrender demand with a single word that would become legend: nuts. Eisenhower read it and let himself smile, briefly, almost painfully. "At least their spirit isn't broken," he told his staff. December 22nd. Patton attacked on schedule, just as he had promised. But the advance crawled. Snow and ice strangled roads. German resistance refused to break. The terrain fought every mile. Inside Bastogne, ammunition reached the point of madness. Some units were down to 5 rounds per rifle. Medical supplies were nearly non-existent. Wounded men died not from wounds, but from time, cold, and the absence of treatment. Eisenhower sent a message to McAuliffe. "Hold at all costs, relief is coming." But privately, the mask slipped. He admitted to his own record that he had given Patton the green light because there was no other choice. And now he was watching the clock like a man watching a fuse burn toward a bomb. Every hour that passed meant more dead paratroopers. And if Patton didn't break through in time, Eisenhower knew exactly whose decision history would blame. December 23rd. The skies finally opened enough for aircraft to fly. C-47s dropped ammunition, food, and medical supplies into Bastogne. It bought time, precious but not much. German attacks intensified, the perimeter shrank, positions were overrun. Fighting turned brutal and close, hand-to-hand in streets and shattered buildings. Then came another report. German forces were preparing a major assault, the kind meant to finish it. Hitler had ordered Bastogne taken at any cost. Eisenhower sent an urgent message to Patton, short, direct, stripped of ceremony. "George, I need maximum effort. The 101st can't hold much longer. Whatever you're doing, do it faster." December 24th, 1944. Christmas Eve. Eisenhower spent the night alone in his office, unable to rest. Staff officers later remarked that he looked a decade older than he had just days before. The latest reports showed Patton's Third Army still fighting mile by mile toward Bastogne, close, but not close enough. At the pace they were advancing, there was no guarantee they would arrive in time, so Eisenhower began preparing for the outcome he feared most. He started writing letters, not orders, not messages to commanders, condolences. He drafted notes to the families of the 101st Airborne, letters he would send if the division was lost. He wrote to McAuliffe's wife, to the family of the division chaplain, to relatives of soldiers he had personally spoken with before they deployed. Each letter carried the same quiet weight: duty fulfilled, sacrifice honored, loss beyond words. Late that night, his aide found him still at his desk, surrounded by unfinished condolence letters. Eisenhower looked up, exhausted, and said only one thing: "I hope I don't have to send these." December 25th, 1944. Christmas Day. There was still no breakthrough. Eisenhower attended chapel services, but his mind never settled. Every 15 minutes he checked for updates. Every 15 minutes, nothing. Bastogne was still surrounded. Third Army was still fighting. Time was bleeding away. Then came December 26, 1944. 4:50 p.m. The phone rang. Eisenhower's aide answered. He listened for a moment and went pale. "Sir, it's General Patton. He says it's urgent." Eisenhower took the phone. "George? Ike, we're through. 4th Armored made contact with the 101st at 1650 hours. The corridor's narrow, but it's open. We're pushing supplies and reinforcements through now. Bastogne is relieved." For several seconds, Eisenhower couldn't speak. His hand clenched the receiver so tightly his knuckles turned white. The officers in the room watched as the tension drained from their supreme commander. His shoulders sagged, his eyes closed for a brief moment, as if his body finally allowed itself to breathe. "George, say that again." "We're through to Bastogne. The Screaming Eagles are safe. They're battered badly, but they held. We got there in time." When Eisenhower finally spoke, his voice broke. "George, I thank God, thank you. You did it. You saved them." There was a pause. Patton, never comfortable with emotion, answered gruffly, "Just doing my job, Ike. Those paratroopers did the real work. We just knocked on the door." "No, George, don't diminish this," Eisenhower replied. "You moved an army 90 degrees in a blizzard and broke through German lines in 4 days. That's not just doing your job." He searched for the right words. "That's why you're invaluable. Despite everything, despite all our conflicts, this is why." After the call ended, Eisenhower stood still for a long moment. Then he turned to his staff. Witnesses later recalled that his eyes were wet, tears he made no effort to hide. "Gentlemen," he said, General Patton has just accomplished something I will remember for the rest of my life. He saved 10,000 American soldiers who were hours, maybe minutes, from annihilation. He did exactly what I asked him to do, when I asked him to do it, against odds everyone said were impossible. Then he added words few expected from him. George S. Patton is the most difficult subordinate I have ever commanded. He is also, without question, one of the finest battlefield commanders America has ever produced. Eisenhower immediately sent official messages. Congratulations to the 101st Airborne for their heroic defense. Commendations to 3rd Army for the relief operation. Formal notice to the War Department that Bastogne was secure. But he also sent Patton a personal telegram. George, words cannot adequately express my gratitude and admiration for what 3rd Army accomplished. You gave your word that you would be there, and you kept it. In doing so, you saved not just 10,000 soldiers, but possibly the entire Ardennes Campaign. Well done does not begin to cover it. This operation will be studied for generations as a model of operational excellence. I am proud to have you under my command. Ike. That evening, Eisenhower's aide found him alone again, staring at the map, his eyes fixed on the thin, fragile corridor leading into Bastogne. A few more hours, perhaps a day, and the defense might have collapsed. Hours separating survival from destruction. In the days and years that followed, Eisenhower's words about Patton evolved, from immediate gratitude to historical judgment. December 27, 1944. In his official statement, Eisenhower declared, "The relief of Bastogne by elements of Lieutenant General Patton's 3rd Army represents one of the outstanding achievements of this war. The speed and coordination involved in disengaging from the Saar offensive, pivoting north, and attacking through severe weather and determined resistance demonstrate the highest level of operational art. The defenders of Bastogne and their relievers have written a new chapter in American military history." Privately, he was even more direct. To Army Chief of Staff General George Marshall, Eisenhower later admitted that without Patton's relief operation, his entire command might have faced serious consequences. Had Bastogne fallen with an entire airborne division destroyed, the psychological impact would have been catastrophic, raising serious questions about Allied strategy, American competence, and his own leadership. Serious questions would have followed about Allied strategy, American competence, and my leadership. Patton prevented that disaster. Whatever frustrations I've had with him, and they are many, this operation justifies every decision I made to keep him in command. To Field Marshal Montgomery, coordinating the Northern Front, Eisenhower noted, "Patton's relief of Bastogne demonstrates American operational capability at its finest. Any doubts about American effectiveness should now be laid to rest." And in his personal diary, Eisenhower admitted the truth he rarely voiced. "I have spent years managing Patton's ego, controversies, and insubordination. There were times I wanted to fire him, times I questioned whether he was worth the trouble. Bastogne answered that question completely. He is worth every frustration, every headache, every moment of anger. Because when it mattered most, when 10,000 American soldiers faced annihilation, George delivered. Not eventually, not with excuses, exactly as he promised. That is the definition of a great commander." On January 2, 1945, Eisenhower sent Patton one final message. "George, I've had time to reflect on Bastogne. What you accomplished goes beyond tactical brilliance. You gave those paratroopers hope when none remained. You proved American forces could execute complex operations under impossible conditions. You changed how the Germans viewed American military power. Most importantly, you saved lives, literally. Every man of the 101st who returned home after this war owes that to your speed and aggression. That legacy matters more than any medal." Years later, in Crusade in Europe, Eisenhower devoted an entire section to Bastogne. General Patton's relief operation stands among the pivotal moments of the war. The rapid movement of 3 divisions, the coordination required, and the aggressive execution under terrible conditions showcased American military excellence. History will debate many aspects of World War II. The relief of Bastogne is not one of them. It was operational genius. In a 1964 interview, 2 years before his death, Eisenhower was asked about his most difficult command decision. He didn't hesitate. "Trusting Patton to relieve Bastogne," he said. "I was betting everything, the lives of 10,000 paratroopers, the stability of our position, on a general who was difficult to manage. But I knew he was the only one who could do it. When that call came, "We're through to Bastogne." Those 4 words may be the most important I heard in the entire war. Eisenhower's final assessment, written in 1965, was simple and definitive. History will remember many generals from World War II. Very few will be remembered for saving an entire division from annihilation through sheer operational brilliance. That was George S. Patton at Bastogne. Whatever else he was, difficult, controversial, flawed, he was the man who refused to accept that those paratroopers were doomed. He promised to save them, and he did. The relief of Bastogne was more than a military victory. It was the moment Eisenhower understood that genius, however hard to control, is worth every frustration when it delivers miracles.